Welcome back to the morning show. As America commemorates the terrible events of 20 years ago, Arise News editorial director Nick Jennings has been looking back at how the 9/11 attacks unfolded and on their impact. Here is his special report.
The moment of the most dramatic event the world has witnessed this century. American Airlines Flight 11 flies into the North Tower of New York's World Trade Center, and the building explodes in a fireball. The deadliest terrorist attack on American soil, causing extensive death and destruction, leading to 2 international wars in the Middle East and countless more deaths. People on the ground initially thought it was an accident, but 17 minutes later, the horror that America was under attack was clear to all as a second plane, United Airlines Flight 175, struck the South Tower.
I've got it all.
Yo, what the fuck? Yo, that's terrorist shit, bro.
That is it. This is terrorist.
As rescuers raced to the scene amid pandemonium and panic, worse was still to come as the towers collapsed in a mountainous cloud of dust. The steel icons of America's economic might reduced to rubble, entombing hundreds trapped within. Some on the lower levels with miraculous stories of escape and survival.
And fell and just hit and just blew out the plaza we were on.
It was complete dark, there is no light. So thank God somebody with little light came up because we couldn't even see what's happening. We all, with dust and debris and...
How'd you get out?
Well, the firefighter, somebody with little light came eventually, and we were following him.
And go to.
What did you do? I'm sorry.
The police officer told everybody to form a human chain, and we held on to each other, and he flashed a light, and he directed us to Building 5, and we went out Building 5.
Did you see people bleeding, and what did you see?
Oh, everybody could see. You want blood? Here's blood. Everybody's bleeding. People are laying all over the floor. It's horrible. And I was there the first time, and this is twice.
Today, we've had a national tragedy.
President Bush was visiting a school in Florida when early reports reached him that America could be under attack, a fact dramatically confirmed when American Airlines Flight 77 plowed into the west side of the Pentagon, striking at the heart of America's military headquarters and killing 184 people. As the president flew back to Washington, escorted by fighter jets, a 4th aircraft, believed to be heading for the White House, crashed in Pennsylvania after its passengers overpowered the hijackers. Later that evening, addressing the American people, Bush promised to hunt down those responsible and bring them to justice.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
للقتال في سبيل الله خير من قيام 60 سنة.
American intelligence identified the al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden as being responsible for the attack. And when his Taliban protectors in Afghanistan refused to hand him over, American troops were sent in to hunt him down. It took 10 years to track and terminate him, hiding in a compound in Pakistan, and it was left to another American president to make the announcement to the nation.
At my direction, the United States launched a targeted operation against that compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. A small team of Americans carried out the operation with extraordinary courage and capability. No Americans were harmed. They took care to avoid civilian casualties. After a firefight, they killed Osama bin Laden and took custody of his body.
Close to 3,000 people died in the 9/11 attacks, which left an indelible scar on America's psyche and its vulnerability to terrorist attack. Nearly 8,000 US troops died in the wars that followed in Afghanistan and Iraq, wars that were intended to stamp out threats by America's enemies. As America remembers that day 20 years on, the shambolic withdrawal from Afghanistan and the resurgence of the Taliban will have added poignancy. Nick Jennings, Arise News.
We are now being joined by Arise News editorial director, Nick Jennings, who is in London. Hello, Nick. Thanks for joining in.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much. What will be your assessment of 20 years after 9/11? America is now out of Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden has been killed. But there are still more terror groups in more places all over the world, even though it looks like the capacity of terrorists to carry out the sort of attacks that they did 20 years ago is very limited. But how will you assess 20 years after? What have we learned? In what direction are we headed globally?
Well, I think, first of all, it's just worth repeating yet again about how dramatic and those events of 20 years ago were. We've seen lots of pictures of them on the television screens over the last week or so as people commemorate. And it was a sort of defining moment of this century so far. I mean, President Biden has pulled out American troops from Afghanistan after 20 years, as we've been reporting widely over the last few weeks. He said he didn't want to get involved in a forever war, as he put it. But the war on terror, as the Americans called it after the attack on the Twin Towers and the other attacks, the war on terror should never stop. And I think there is a great deal of concern that with the Taliban now back in control, ironically, of Afghanistan, and resurgent and well-armed, and with reports that other militant groups, whether it's Al-Qaeda or other militant groups, taking shelter in Afghanistan or using it as base, there's a lot of concern openly expressed by military people and intelligence chiefs that another similar attack to 9/11 could happen again if the enemies of the West and the enemies of the United States choose to do so. And Al-Qaeda has also issued statements in the last week or so saying that they will continue to attack American targets where American troops are still based on what they call Islamic soil, which is places in the Middle East. So, yes, the war on terror will never end. The war on terror is a forever war, despite what President Biden says. And incidentally, he's been very unpopular as a result of, he didn't set in motion the withdrawal from Afghanistan. That was done by President Trump. But the precipity of the way that the withdrawal happened and the way that the Afghanistan army capitulated like a house of cards, I think a lot of the fingers are pointing at President Biden saying that could have been better managed. But to answer your question, I don't think we're ever going to be free completely of the spectre of terrorist attacks hanging over our head. And certainly intelligence officials in the United Kingdom have been making it very, very clear. And a lot of the defence budget in the UK, for example, is being used to hunt down those people or to prevent, to gather information to prevent another attack like that happening ever again. And it is worth pointing out that that attack involving 4 aircraft was very well planned, very well orchestrated, very well carried out. And also worth pointing out that 15 of the hijackers came from Saudi Arabia. They didn't come from the Taliban and they didn't come Al-Qaeda.
Well, Nick, you've said it right. The war on terror should never end. Biden did say that he didn't want to be engaged in a forever war. He will be visiting families today. I believe he'll be attending ceremonies in New York, Pennsylvania, and the Pentagon. What rhetoric would you expect from him?
Well, he's not going to say anything at these ceremonies. What's unusual and notable is he will be the first American president, not the first American president to attend the New York ceremonies at Ground Zero, but he will be the first American president to visit all 3 sites where the airplane crashed, if you like. So he will first of all be going to Ground Zero in New York to attend the ceremony there in just a few hours. He will then fly to Shanksville in Pennsylvania, where Flight 93 was brought down by the unbelievable bravery of those people on board. And then finally, he will go back to Washington and attend the ceremony at the Pentagon, which is just across the river from the main part of Washington. So he will be attending all three events. He was supposedly due to make comments at Ground Zero in New York, but there's been some controversy with members of the family members of those that died saying they didn't want him to attend because there are reports that there is a document or there are classified documents that have not been exposed to the public, that many of the victims' families want these documents made public because there are suggestions that the finger of suspicion points directly towards the Saudi government, something the Saudi government has very much denied. So yes, he will be attending all these events today, very poignant events, but he won't be making any speeches. He did, of course, make a recorded speech last night.
Okay, Nick. How will you advise world leaders to proceed now, 20 years after? Recall, of course, that there were incidences of terror attacks, even in the UK, Manchester, London, etc. Nigeria, for example, is dealing with its own. Kenya has had, serious issues. What should be the approach, really? Radicalization, or just basically prepare, for an endless war? How do you think that the world should proceed?
I think there are far more distinguished and people than me who can advise world leaders what they do and terrorism. But I think it's about gathering intelligence. It's about having people right at the heart of these Islamic extremist groups who are, in fact, sleeper cells that can report on, report very early on potential attacks, so that the security services are always alerted. I mean, it's about never dropping your guard, effectively, and having, cameras everywhere. We've seen since, the events 20 years ago how much air travel has changed with much more security. It would be much more difficult, I think, for hijackers today to take explosives onto an aircraft, but it's not impossible. Nothing is impossible if people put their minds to trying to carry out these terrorist attacks. And what we've seen in the last 20-odd years is so many of what they call lone wolf attacks, where even just using knives and attacking people, or in the case in France, where people extremists hijack a vehicle, a lorry, and then drive it through crowds of people walking along the beach parade. So it's very difficult, but I think it is about being ever vigilant and having a very, very strong intelligence and security service.
Well, Nick, thank you very much for sharing your opinions on the September 11th tragedy, and your video was excellent. Thank you very much, Nick.